Hello my friends and welcome. My name is Dennis and I used to fly Boeing 737 as an airline pilot. So here we have the new video about the recent crash of the Jeju Boeing 737 in South Korea. And definitely I must state that crew didn't have enough time to deal with the problems they faced with. Also there are additional details uncovered that this airplane was involved in one more emergency situation just a couple of days before this crash. Well, let's go step by step, firstly reviewing this video. So the airplane was approaching the runway 19, in this case. It done light maneuver, so it was well controlled before touching down, well aligned with the central line, and here the airplane struggles to land for a very long distance, so the airplane entered so-called ground effect. So it was flying very short from the runway. And finally, it was the touchdown very late, almost at the end part of the runway, as you can see. Luckily, we have this video filmed by the eyewitnesses. The more data you have, the more visual data you have, the better it is for investigation. But at the same time, I see the blur at least from the right-hand engine. Here I'm honestly not sure, but this one seems to be working. Strangely, but the bird was ingested in this particular engine. The video quality is not that great, but definitely we may judge that airplane overflown the most part of the runway. So there was no attempt for it to go around. It means that there is the high probability that something happened to the airplane which couldn't allow it to go around. Again, we see on this video how the engine number 2, the right-hand engine, ingested the bird, which led to compressor stall, but obviously 100% whether it was the bird or not, only investigation team might say, but it seems like it was after all. Before the flight crew got the warning from the air traffic control that there's some of the migration of the birds, but it's the usual stuff, especially for this airport. The Muan airport is actually surrounded by the areas where birds live, breed and migrate. And here are the most frequent spots for the birds to appear. And judging on the flight radar 24, the airplane was approaching very close to one of those areas. But birds may fly everywhere. There is no robust protection against the bird strikes. Well, there are some of the airport services which might have some of the tools, but the birds fly basically everywhere, and sometimes they do not afraid of some sort of the small speaker screamers, so definitely they may do some of the harm to the airplane sometimes, but birds are birds. We start flying after the birds, so we cannot get rid of them. Those are nature species, right? So the airplane was stable on approach 100%. There were flaps extended with that speed, and also it looks like the flaps were extended by the time of the go around. So definitely the main event start to evolve after this bird strike. By the way, the landing gear here seems to be up. So the normal thing, then you have the technical issue. You usually go somewhere a little further from the airport, you go to the holding pattern, you do all of the checklists needed to prepare your airplane for the further approach and landing with a new configuration. If, for example, you have a single engine, hydraulic problems, flaps problems, and so on. But here, 100% it wasn't done like that. It was something like this, an immediate landing. And how do we know it? Well, maybe you can see it over here, but anyways, I'll write it here. The last position reported according to the ADS-B data, the data provided on the flight radar 24. So this exact position was at 11:58 UTC time. The UTC time we basically use elsewhere in every point of our world. You fly according to this time. But according to official reports, the airplane crash landed at 0003 UTC. It's also called Zulu time. So 5 minutes, maximum 6, before everything was controlled and crash landing. And in such a short time period, you obviously cannot handle any kind of the failure. The only way how you can skip all of those procedures and checklists if you are on a stable approach, if you are sure about your landing, and if you correctly configure your airplane. So let's say if you are on a final approach and if you have the engine fire, it is better to continue it. Call the ATC for immediate assistance, because if you perform the go-around, you are not sure whether you can handle with this fire or not, whether those fire bottles would be enough to cope with the engine fire. So in this case, obviously, it's logical to continue. But in our case, it wasn't the engine fire, but the compressor stall, which could be caused by the bird strike. And according to the flight crew training manual FCTM of Boeing 737-800, you may continue the approach. If an engine failure should occur on final approach with the flaps in landing position, the decision to continue the approach or execute a go-round should be made immediately. So you basically have two options, and it's up to the flight crew and for the captain, obviously, to make the final decision. If the approach is continued and sufficient thrust is available, yes, if you have the single engine working, continue the approach with landing flaps, so you don't need to change the configuration. And if the sufficient thrust is not available, you need to change the configuration by retracting the flaps to 15. In this case, you also should increase the speed by 20 knots over what you have for flaps 30 or flaps 40. This would be not less than VREF for flaps 15. But if go-round is required, perform a missed approach procedure except use flaps 15. On Boeing 737, if you are prepared for approach with a single engine, you approach and land with flaps 15, but for go-round you use flaps 1. Subsequent flap retraction should be made at a safe altitude. So was it a proper decision for the crew to go around after they caught the bird in the engine? Presumably again. Well guys, if it happened on the final stage of approach, I personally wouldn't do it. But you know, I'm speaking with you from this armchair. If I was in their shoes, probably I would act differently and maybe would do my own mistakes, because there you are under the stress factor. And also I personally cannot judge the actions of the flight crew. Only investigation team might do it in their outcome. But what we know that for some reason crew just rushed for landing. They didn't go to holding pattern, no. Just in a few minutes they landed with opposite course. The airplane for sure was controlled because they've touched the runway. Well, just as a reference, I want to show you how the track of the uncontrolled flight looks like. This is Azerbaijani Embraer 190, which was shut down over Russia recently. You see that pilots barely were able to control the airplane path. And finally, they did manage to get to the runway using the engine thrust only. But miraculously, with this landing outside the airfield, many people survived the crash. One more thing guys, and it could be very important for the further investigation. This particular airplane registration Hotel Lima 8088 was flying a couple of days ago to Beijing, but on its way it returned back to South Korea, landing in Seoul. By the time of the diversion, crew set squawk 7700, which means Mayday, emergency. And the cause of this emergency is yet unknown, but the airline, Jeju Air, 100% knows it, as well as aviation authorities. But for aviation community, it's still, for this hour I'm recording this video, is a mystery. So the Aviation Herald, here they published the big article. I'll put the link for it in the video description just below. It will be updated as they do as usual, so we all may check the latest information on their source. So they rely to the public information that the crew declared emergency at 0858. It means 11:58 UTC time, the last time the airplane was spotted on the flight radar 24 approaching runway 01. And here they state that definitely the airplane was approaching runway 01, declared Mayday, and later on landed on runway 19. One of the ground observers reported that aircraft flew through a flock of birds. 2 or 3 pop sounds were heard, but it happened because of the compressor stall. We saw it on the video. Like the air cannot constantly go to the combustion chamber and then it explodes with this puff sound. Then the aircraft overflew the observer. It had the landing gear down, but on a video we saw that the landing gear seems to be up. You select the gear up on a go-around and you have the positive rate of climb to reduce the drag. And why was it so difficult to stop the airplane on the runway without the landing gear? Well, basically in case of the belly landing, there are just 3 of the spots which touch the ground. Both of the engine covers, the lower part of the engines and the outer part of the tail. So the friction spots are not that big, and if you have lots of the energy, high speed basically, you may slide like that for a very long distance. The proper way to stop the airplane is obviously with the landing gear converting kinetic energy into the temperature. That's why if you brake hard on your car, you'll find your brakes really hot. And this is like skiing with a very small spots where the surface touches the runway. And you mainly cannot control the airplane direction because the nose gear gear is just absent. So the only thing to deal with it is to lower your approach speed to the minimum possible, just to make your landing distance shorter. But we already saw in the beginning of this video that airplane landed very far from the touchdown zone. And still there is the question why aircraft was in this configuration and why reverse was open for the engine which ingested the bird. Did the bird cause the thrust reverser to open mid-flight, or the pilots extended it upon landing? Because yes, on Boeing 737 you may extend reverse thrust even without landing gear. You need to be close to the ground, like 10 feet above. And here probably I might allow myself just a little speculation about the possible problem that could occur and why the airplane landed without flaps and landing gear. Here guys, don't take my words as truth, that's what I basically think, because I was thinking about this air crash for a very long time. I still don't have the conclusion, but I have an idea why it could happen. It's not 100% that it happened like that. So the hydraulic system of Boeing 737 is actually very easy to understand. There are 3 of the systems, 2 main and 1 standby. System A, B and standby, as you can see here. So there is the engine driven pump for each of the main systems and also the electrical pump. So basically there is the physical gearbox mounted on the engine, and engine rotates the pump. But there is one more hydraulic electrical pump, so it is here, which is powered by the engine 2 generator. It is very important for our case to understand because bird hit the engine number 2 as you saw on the video. It caused compressor stall and probably the engine wasn't working normally, if it was working at all. So we don't know it yet, but there is the probability for this engine driven pump to cut off. Plus there is also the chance for generator 2 to go off and will not have this electrical pump for hydraulic system A. So yeah, it's better to show you on this scheme. Generator goes off, so we don't have pressure from this line, and engine driven pump goes off, we don't have pressure from this line. But what happens if somehow, I'm not saying that it's true in this case, no, in any sort of the case, but I'm speaking about the probability. What happens if you shut down the wrong engine, misleading the procedures to cope with your engine, with the problem engine? So you basically cut the remaining generator and you cut the engine driven pump, so you lose pressure in both of those systems, and only standby system will work. The airplane go in manual reversion mode, then it's very hard to control the airplane, but still some of the remaining pressure inside hydraulic system may initially help you to fly without huge forces needed. But even in this case there is still a chance to regain the pressure in your hydraulic systems. You need to power your AC electric motor pumps via APU, so auxiliary power unit. It's like one more engine, but it is not made to produce the thrust. No, it produces the needed electricity and also may pressurize the aircraft. Will use it all the time, especially during the ground operations. You basically start this engine, put the electrical supply onto it, you turn the air condition on for the passengers and pilots to feel comfortable in a hot summer day or in a cold winter day. So let's say in this so far fiction case, then you don't have the electrical power from your engines, you absolutely need to start APU. And then you may connect this generator to electrical system of the aircraft and power your hydraulics. The thing is that starting APU takes a while, like more than a minute for sure. So you select the switch and there's the automatic starting system, starts this engine, and after you see the blue light on APU, you can switch it on and power your electrical system or whatever you need. And by the way, the bleed air from the auxiliary power unit is also used for the engine start. But you know guys, according to the minimum equipment list, the airplane might be dispatched for the flights without the auxiliary power unit, well, except for the extended range operations. If procedures do not require its use, for example, if you have some procedures of your airline, especially including APU, what you need to do is to perform the visual inspection of the area and confirm that there is no evidence of heat damage or delamination. So it basically means that in this case you have nothing to connect to your electrical system. And again, even if auxiliary power unit is working, it takes lots of the time to start it. And you may find yourself too similar to this situation. Yes, I'm not speaking about this particular one, but I'm telling you about the possible variants now. Then you're very close to the ground, one of the engines is working here and there because of the bird strike, the other engine was shut down, and you don't have time to restart APU, you lost your hydraulic system to extend landing gear and flaps. So basically you have the huge list of actions that requires at least half an hour of flight to deal with all of the checklists. And the only option here is to extend the landing gear manually and electrically extend the flaps. But again, it takes lots of the time for electrical motor to extend the flaps. Could it be in this case? Yes, there is the probability, but again, I'm not saying that it was like that. For now, mainly it's a mystery. So for sure, we should wait and listen for official investigation report. But why do I say about the possible wrong engine shutdown? Well, before in aviation history, there were the cases. Like for example, it happened with TransAsia Airways in Taiwan with the flight 235 ATR 72600. By the way, I also used to fly ATR for quite a long time. So what happened here that 2 minutes after takeoff, pilots reported an engine failure, and after further climb, the other engine, which was operating normally, was mistakenly shut down. So pilots found themselves with no engines. Very close to the ground, then the airspeed was still low. So what happened? The airplane basically stalled, hitting one of the cars, and later on went to the water. There were 58 people on board, 15 of those survived the crash. And inside there were actually 3 pilots together with instructor. And still they managed to shut down the wrong engine, so there was no cross-check. So because here crew was in a rush after performing missed approach after the bird strike, which potentially could damage the engine. So in this case, it could be also as a variant that after the bird strike, you have the engine problems, you shut down the wrong engine, and you're so close to the ground that you don't have time to extend your gear, flaps, start APU, and plane basically lands after 5 minutes. I think that investigation team should look through this possible idea. Well, at least from my side, I don't find any sort of the other explanation. Yeah, again, here it looks like one of the engines, this one, which was hit, was working. Well, I've tried to zoom in as much as possible, and here clearly you can see some of the distortion here coming on the ground, which you may only have if the engine is working. But again, how it is working after the impact, was it able to produce enough thrust for the airplane to hold on, or was the generator powered by it, the hydraulic system itself? But here it seems like nothing compared to this part. It seems like this engine wasn't working. Again, I'll try to show you. So the hot air is going down here, but here I don't see it. Clearly you may see the difference. Also, I think that here it was already the reverse thrust selected, because the heat is blowing just in front, making this illusion that this engine is bigger than this one. It's the effect of the magnifying glass here. Yeah, I'll try to check it out again. So the airplane was flying here, everything looks stable except of flaps and landing gear. And let's look at 10 feet. If it increases in size, it means that the reverse was open. So we're here already close to the ground. And yes, it increases in size. So the reverse was open before the touchdown 100%. And this engine, after the bird strike, was working. And why the reverse wasn't deployed on the right-hand engine? Probably it wasn't working. And I agree with this commenter. If both engines off and APU running, you still have both hydraulic systems available via electronic hydraulic pump 1 and 2, but you need APU for that. If both engines off and both electronic pumps available, you still have the standby pump available, but yes, you'll not have the landing gear, usual extension, and the flaps. In this case, you have the hydraulic power on the rudder, yes, and able to lower flaps and slats, but flaps just electrically. There is the electric motor for alternate flaps extension. And here I agree, if you lose everything on Boeing 737, like no electricity, no hydraulic power, nothing, but you still have the engines running, you may fly this airplane and able to land it. Because on Boeing 737, you may manipulate the flight controls directly with your control column. Yes, it's difficult, it's called manual reversion, but it's not impossible to land the airplane. But in case you have the problems with engines at the same time, it's very difficult situation. And here we come to the decision making. Was it really necessary after the bird strike to perform the missed approach maneuver? Then you are fully stabilized and there are perfect weather conditions. Guys, I'm not the one who might answer that. We should wait for investigation team and experts to respond. Guys, I highly recommend you to check the channel Blanket area. I think that John Brown is way more competent than me. He's also a Boeing pilot, but he flies a bigger machine than 737. And he makes very competent reports about aviation accidents with small airplanes, with bigger airplanes. And he reviewed, by the way, the crash of the Jeju Air Boeing 737. And he agrees that this wall is something really outstanding. So he says also that usually it's done like that, very soft materials. Actually, it's the main factor why the airplane crashed into so many small pieces and why actually passengers lost their lives. Yes, the airplane wasn't configured properly, it was belly landing at the high speed and everything, but the fact is the fact, airplane collided with this huge wall. If there wasn't the wall, the outcome 100% would be different. John also explains the long approach, which was in this case because of the ground effect. And you may face it on the small airplanes. For example, I fly a Bristol, which is also low wing composition of the aircraft. So I regularly enter this ground effect, which actually helps to make some of the kiss landings. Here John also says about the extension of the landing gear, the thing that I also told you in my first video about this aviation accident. One of my colleagues, we were flying together in Ukraine International Airlines, noted that there was the case with Air India Express Flight 812, which was flying to Dubai to Mangalore International Airport and there skirted the runway. It happened because captain was so determined to continue approach that he didn't look at anything. So the airplane wasn't stabilized. The airplane also fell down the hillside, and investigation team also stated that localizer antenna was too robust. It was reinforced too much for its needs. So after hitting this wall, the airplane obtained substantial damages to its construction, and that led to more life losses, which could be avoided in this case. So this thing, as John Brown also says, is not okay. It's not standard. And I'm sure that it will be included in the final investigation result, because actually, as I've showed you in my latest video about this crash, there's pretty much free space behind this runway. So this wall actually creates just an extra obstacle, robust obstacle, able to stop the airplane in a matter of milliseconds, causing its destruction. And again, guys, what I say in my videos might not be true. I'm just a guy with a microphone, and we should believe the investigation team, which already recovered the black boxes, cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder. So they'll find out for sure. We just need to wait a little and see if the variant I explained to you was in this case. As usual, I wish you all a peaceful sky.